In this video, we'll be looking at wikis. Wiki is actually the Hawaiian word for quick, and wikis were originally designed as a quick and easy collaboration platform. My name is Mark Pegram, and I'll be taking you through the material about wikis. In every online video, you'll see a brief notice like this one. It's a reminder that although you can watch the videos as often as you wish and even download them, copyright law prevents us from sharing them with anyone who is not enrolled in this course. The most famous wiki is, of course, Wikipedia. It is important to remember that Wikipedia is just one wiki. Nevertheless, it is the largest in the world, and it's a good example of how wikis work. If you look up an article such as the one on e-learning, you'll find a page a bit like this. Behind this page, you have a number of other pages. You have a talk page where you can discuss this particular article, say what you agree with and disagree with, and so on. You have an edit page where you can make changes and modifications, and perhaps most importantly of all, you have a history page. This is where every single change that is made is logged, and if someone were to come along and destroy this page, perhaps even accidentally, all you would have to do to recover it is to go one step back in the history log. So in a way, the history log is the security mechanism that wikis have built into them. If you have a private wiki where people have to register in order to contribute, and that's certainly the case in most educational settings, then you not only know what changes were made and when they were made, but you know who made them. And it's a way for teachers to keep track of what individual students have contributed to group projects. You might like to pause this video and go and have a look at the Common Craft video, Wikis in Plain English, which you'll find at the address at the bottom of the screen. This video explains the philosophy, or if you like, the principles underpinning wikis, rather than focusing too much on the technological or technical aspects. This can be a good video to show to students if you're planning to get them to do some work with a wiki. Like blogs and many other Web 2.0 tools, wikis nowadays are typically available in a freemium model. That means there's a basic level of functionality available for free, but if you want additional functionality or additional privacy controls, you may need to pay a fee, usually an annual fee. That means, though, that you can explore a number of different wiki platforms before deciding which one to use and which one indeed, perhaps eventually, to invest in. The world's most famous spokesperson for wikis is probably Jimmy Wales, the man behind Wikipedia. He tours the world giving talks about Wikipedia and about wikis in general, and he puts the emphasis very much on collaboration and community, on the fact that Wikipedia, and indeed wikis in general, are a social rather than a technological innovation. He also talks about the importance of disagreement in safety. People can argue, he says, about their differences on Wikipedia rather than pulling guns or bombs on each other. He also talks about the principle of accountability, that is the history log, which is effectively the security mechanism that is built into a wiki. And of course, if you have an active community of users, they will police the use of the wiki, such as Wikipedia, and any vandalism or mistakes can be relatively quickly undone. You might like to pause this video and go and have a look at the Wikipedia entry about Jimmy Wales. You'll find out a lot more about him there. If you'd like to explore in a bit more detail how a Wikipedia entry evolves, you might like to pause this video again and go to the address at the bottom of the screen. Although this is rather old, it's still very relevant, and it is a fascinating exploration of the evolution of a Wikipedia article. There is actually a lot of fear and misunderstanding around Wikipedia, and one of the underlying questions which teachers ask themselves and which they ask their students to ask themselves is, should you believe Wikipedia? You might want to pause this video for a second to think about your own answer before reading what Amy Brookman has to say on this question. I'll bring up her response to it now. Wikipedia, like all wikis, is underpinned by the principle of collective intelligence, the idea that a whole lot of people working together can achieve something much greater than any one person working on their own. Of course, with Wikipedia, it's important to be careful, as Amy Brookman points out. With high-profile articles, you probably have very high-quality information. With less high-profile articles, you might not. So therefore, it's important to ask critical questions about Wikipedia. That leads into the area of information literacy, which is a topic we'll come back to in a little while. I'm going to show you some quotes now about collective intelligence and also about social constructivism. In many ways, these two ideas fit very neatly together. Pause the video as often as you'd like to have a close look at these quotes. The quotes on the preceding slides, of course, are all about the benefits of wikis in terms of collective intelligence, in terms of pedagogy, and especially in terms of social constructivism. If you'd like some more guidelines on the mechanics of wikis, you might find this site useful. It's simply called Getting Tricky with Wikis, and you can see the address at the bottom of the screen. It tells you how to achieve a variety of different effects on the Wikispaces service. So if you're using Wikispaces, it will certainly be valuable. However, many of the tips also apply, perhaps with slight modifications to the code used, to other wiki services as well. All right, let's look at a few examples of the kinds of things that teachers and students have done with wikis. First up, this is a relatively old wiki created by a high school biology teacher I worked with in Hong Kong a few years ago. She was teaching a fairly tightly structured exam-oriented course, which didn't leave her a lot of flexibility to play around with social media or indeed social constructivism, but she did want to introduce a more social constructivist element to her classes, and she came up with what I think is an absolutely ingenious solution. At the beginning of semester, on the top page of a wiki, she placed the entire syllabus of her biology unit, and you can see it here. Key terms were hyperlinked. And if at the beginning of the semester you had clicked on one of those hyperlinks, like for example the word stromatolite, you would have been taken to a page like this. Here you can see some key questions about stromatolites with some guidance on how to respond to them. She put all of the students in her class into pairs, and each pair was assigned to write a Wikipedia-style article responding to the questions on the topic they had been set. Because everything is tracked on a wiki, you can see all of the discussion posts where this particular pair of students were talking to each other. A few posts were made by the teacher, but the vast majority of these 56 posts were from the students. Not only that, you can see the details of what they were talking about. The two students are symbolized by the blue and red colored blocks here, and it's pretty obvious that at the beginning they didn't have much idea at all about stromatolites. As time went on, they went and found some references online and some chunks of text that they could use. I love this comment here by one of the students. It's in Wikipedia. We need to check if it's actually reliable. That is a great illustration of an awareness of information literacy. I wish all of our students had that kind of awareness. That certainly is what we need to teach them. I won't show you the whole conversation, but here is the final article that this particular pair of students produced. There's some text, there are some references, there's even an illustration. The beauty of this is that when the whole class of students had created their articles, under the watchful eye of the teacher naturally, the class as a whole had effectively written the textbook, and that's what they then used to revise for the exam. So this was a brilliant way of introducing a social constructivist element into a tightly structured exam-oriented course. Now let me show you a much more recent example of a wiki, also created with the Wikispaces service. This was created by another Hong Kong teacher who was teaching English to Korean students. That's why you can see some Korean text on this page here. Each student was given their own section of the wiki where they could begin drafting an essay on a given topic. And the teacher could come along and make comments like the one that you see in the right-hand column here, where she's pointing out that the introduction paragraph has only one sentence and suggesting, obviously, that the student needs to fix that. Once again, because everything is tracked on a wiki, it's possible to see that the student has gone in a couple of times and made some changes. It's also possible to look at the whole text and see everything that has been added, which is in green, and everything which has been removed, and that's in red. Only the teacher looked at the various drafts of each student's essays, but once they had a final draft, they were asked to turn it into a polished flipbook format, and those flipbooks were presented on bookshelves, as you can see here. The other students could come along, click on any of the titles, and read them. So here's the final version of the essay we saw being drafted, An Empty Room in My School. And here is the full text. Once students had read these books, they were asked to make some comments underneath, and that meant that the students in the class got feedback not only from the teacher as they had while they were drafting their work, but at the end they got feedback from their peers. Indeed, wikis can function well as part of an integrated suite of Web 2.0 and other similar tools. Here's one example from a Perth teacher of maths, showing how Wikispaces could be used alongside Padlet, QR codes, and word clouds as part of a maths project. You might like to pause the video and have a closer look at what this teacher has to say. And here is a very sophisticated example of a Wikispaces wiki set up to underpin a hermeneutics course at university level. Here, the lecturer who set up this course is explaining what students will be asked to do. His overall aim was to allow students to experience distributed intelligence or collective intelligence as they participated in a sequence of activities. You might like to pause the video so you can read more closely what this lecturer had to say about the setup of the project. And you might also like to pause the following slides so you can look more closely at what students were doing at each stage of the project. And this is a final slide from this lecturer wrapping up his description of the project. It's a nice overview of the kind of distributed intelligence or collective intelligence that could be experienced by students using a wiki designed in this way. All right, here's an example of a very nice cross-cultural wiki. This was set up by a home economics teacher I worked with in Singapore a few years back. And she set this wiki up as the platform for a collaboration between her home economics students in Singapore and a group of English language learners in Japan. The very first task she set them was to work together in groups, so each group contained a couple of Singaporean students and a couple of Japanese students, and they had to compare food pyramids from around the world. So they looked, for example, at the US food pyramid, They also looked at the Mediterranean food pyramid, the Singaporean food pyramid, and of course the Japanese food pyramid. While they were doing this, students were learning about a particular content area to do with food and nutrition. But they were also having an interesting cross-cultural experience because they had to write up a project working together with students from a different cultural background and indeed a different linguistic background. So this was a very nice cross-cultural exercise. With most Web 2.0 tools and Web 2.0 related tools, there are certain dangers and risks we need to keep in mind. I just want to point out one major risk with wikis, but it's an issue that applies across a lot of Web 2.0 platforms. And that's the issue of information literacy, which we've already touched on. It's really, really important that we teach our students that they need to critically evaluate everything that they come across online. But actually, as with blogs and as with a number of other platforms, when students themselves begin producing wikis, it does help them to understand because they realize that they can put anything online and therefore so can anyone else. I'm going to show you a selection of slides now that come from the work of Mark Pesce. These date back a few years now, but what they show is a series of encyclopedia entries, ostensibly at least, that were all found on the web. These are all entries on the subject of kangaroos, but they come from very, very different places. Have a look at these, pause the video for as long as you need to read each one. As you will have seen by now, the first slide showed an encyclopedia entry from Wikipedia. The second came from Uncyclopedia and was meant to be humorous. This one here comes from Conservapedia, as you can see. It's certainly not meant to be humorous. It does, however, represent a point of view on the world that a lot of people would not share. And so these three slides taken together are a great illustration of exactly why our students need to acquire information literacy skills. That means they need to learn to ask critical questions about everything that they read online. Who wrote this? Why did they write it? When did they write it? Who did they write it for? But actually, as I mentioned earlier, the mere experience of having written their own wiki entries will help students to understand that actually anyone can write anything online, and it will help to make this lesson about truth, trust, and authority really resonate with students. So if we pull all of this together, we can say that wikis are great collaborative, constructivist learning tools. They are all about collective intelligence. And as I've said already, collective intelligence does sit very well with social constructivism. On the downside, there may be some information literacy issues with wikis and more generally with material that is found online. But of course, if students are creating their own wikis, they will have a bit of a sense that actually anyone can put anything on the internet, so it's necessary to evaluate what you come across. When students are doing activities with wikis, there may be some issues around a lack of participation or feedback. Most teachers deal with this by setting up some pretty tight structures where they say to students, you need to contribute a certain amount of text, or you need to contribute a certain number of times, or you need to make a certain number of comments on your peers or your classmates' work. Those sorts of structures can deal with the possibility of a lack of participation and feedback and ensure that students really do get the most out of the kind of collaboration that is possible on this social constructivist platform. Now that we've spoken about wikis, you might like to go to the wikis page of the Digital Learning website, which you'll find at the address at the bottom of the screen. Here, you'll see a summary of most of the main points we've covered. You'll find links to examples of the educational uses of wikis, including some of those that we've discussed. And you'll find links to places where you can go to set up your own wiki.